and we're just going to start here, kind of review. This will be lesson 4 in this generation lesson, and we'll just start here, put some things up on the board, kind of get our thinking back to where we should be, and then get going in some information. I hope this morning won't be dull and boring for you, because it's going to be really more about some history and more about how to identify what's happening in the wintertime in our country, and how to identify then who we begin to talk to. Our deal this year, the seminars have all been focused on the issue of evangelism. We started with a study on evangelism, how to have that outline, those crunch questions, how to go about talking and just really basically falling in love with people, with lost people. And that's a hard thing to do sometimes, because when you do that, sometimes you just want to knock them between the eyes and bloody their nose. And you can prove the Bible's right. The wringing of the nose bringeth forth blood. Proverbs, it does, okay? If somebody ever says, well, that book's not right, just say, yeah, come here for a minute. Yeah, see, it is right. That happens every time, But really just falling in love with the souls of the lost. And again, evangelism, there is no A, B, C, D, E, F way of doing it, as long as you have the right gospel in it. How I do it will be completely different how you do it, because of our personality differences. And that's why on our overhead in church, I have that thing about you have a successful evangelistic outcome when you simply give the gospel. Not whether somebody believes it or not. That's not your job. Your job as an ambassador is to present the information. So let's go get the information, get some ideas, some crunch questions, some helps. Then we went in and looked at the issue of some apologetic type ideas about where's God, who's Jesus, the Bible, things like that. We did that for a couple months, 6 lessons, really so that you begin to have an understanding, because people will raise questions. I was talking to a young man beginning of the year, and I got done talking with him. We're just kind of paused, and I just asked him, I said, do you even believe in God? And he goes, well, I know there's somebody out there bigger than me, a higher power, but I don't, not really. Well, now, by asking the question, what do I understand where he's at spiritually? You have to use questions to identify, so you then know where to go. And so we started talking about the God of the Bible. Come to find out that that's who he really believed, was that he just didn't know the name, the term, which is good, because when you talk to people and they start throwing you terms, you got to wonder, they've been taught how to do what? How to answer you to get you off their back, or they really know what's going on. You have to, you got to learn to have that discerning ear with them. And if you don't, then deal with them. And when you find out that, oh yeah, okay, he was just faking it to make it, then you've learned. Jeremiah, the Lord says, when Jeremiah says that my sword doesn't return, I'm going to dip my sword in blood and it doesn't return bloody. In other words, get the sword, get in the battle, get bloody, because that's the only way you're going to learn. Then we spent, I think, 3 months talking about Islam, because Islam's the second largest religion in the world. You're going to run into them when you talk to people. Nowadays you can be talking to almost anyone and they will be a Muslim. They don't have to have the Arabic look anymore. More and more different folks, different colors of skin are becoming Muslim. So, okay, where do they come from? What's going on with that? How do you, an understanding of that, and the Hadith and the Quran, and the fact that it's a 7th century occult that Muhammad picked up and put in. It's not a religion of peace. It's actually a religion built on the back of a sword and war. So we looked at all that history there. And then this last month and this month, we've been talking about the generations, because you're going to talk to different people. And so they're going to have different viewpoints. And the verse that we started with really was in 1 Chronicles 12. We'll go there in just a second. But if you look at Genesis 8:22, the Lord talking to Noah and dealing with Noah. Noah's come off the ark. The flood is over. He's built an altar unto the Lord in verse 20. Then in verse 21, the Lord smelled a sweet savor, and the Lord said, so the Lord is talking to Noah. Verse 22, while the earth remaineth, seed time and harvest, and cold and heat, and summer and winter, and day and night shall not cease. So there's cycles there, right from day one, and I say day one after the flood, but this also, day one after the flood, there's now a cycle in the earth. There's the springtime, which is going to move us into the summer. My chalk's not working. Which then moves us into fall, right? Which then moves us into the winter time, which then moves us into spring. He talks about seed time. When do you plant? You plant in the spring, don't you? When do you harvest? You harvest down here in the fall. Where do you have cold? That's in the winter. Where do you have heat? That's in the summer. Okay? So you've got this cycle. You've got a circle that begins to happen. And the reason that this stuff is fascinating to me, and several years ago, come over to 1 Chronicles 12. Let's go there, and then we're going to need Romans 13. Get 1 Chronicles 12 and Romans 13. It's kind of a review from last time to get us started. Several years ago at Grace School of the Bible at the men's meeting, Dad taught about the generations and the cycles, and he used Strauss and Howe's book, The Fourth Turning. I'm going to use their book called Generations, The History of America's Future, 1584 to 2069, okay? This book, just so you understand, this book has a copyright of 1991. These guys are socialist. They're sociologists, okay? They're unbelievers, but they're teaching a biblical principle, okay? So biblical principles get taught all the time by the unsaved. They just don't identify it as what? A biblical principle. What did they do? They come in, they study the generations, they study the cycles. The earth is on a cycle since Noah. Now, how many turns? Who knows, okay? All right? But our nation is on a cycle. Your life is on a cycle. Economically, there are economic cycles. When you hear them talk about the bubble's going to burst in real estate or the dot-com stuff, that's a cycle. And how you understand that is you go back in time and you study it, and you see where it began, where it blossomed, where it paid out, and then where it popped. And if you're good enough with the procrastination of it and foretelling of it, you can do what? You can real quickly see that. I studied a course several years ago. I found it in cleaning out some of the garage on commodities and commodity corn, and how to track them and how to invest in them and paper. Do it all this on paper. Don't put money in it yet and blah, blah, blah. And you know what the guys do? They do this right here. They just do it on a straight line. Because what are they looking for? Gold was here. It's ticked to here. It went back to here. Now it's going to go here. But last time it did this move, it went way up here. So they're buying low and trying to sell high, the whole bit. But what are they doing? They're doing cycles. And they're doing a circular thing. So the cycle thing starts in Genesis 8 there, and the earth is on it. Every nation on the earth is on it, and peoples are on it. If you look at 1 Chronicles 12, in verse 32, and the children of Issachar, which were men that had understanding of the times. So the sons of Issachar knew where Israel was on what? The cycle of God's program for Israel. They knew where they were. And what did they have? They have understanding of the times to know what Israel ought to do. So these guys understood where they were on the timeline of God. And they understood what? We're here, so we need to do that. Okay? Now come over to Romans 13 and verse number 11. Because guess what Paul tells us? Same thing. Romans 13:11. And that, knowing the time, that now it is high time to awake out of sleep, for now is our salvation nearer than we believed. Now, that what do we know? We know the time. Where are we in God's timeline, the chart? Well, we're in the dispensation of grace, but where are we in the dispensation of grace? Well, Paul tells us in 1 Timothy 4, perilous times are come. Some are going to be depart from the faith. Then he gives that whole, in 2 Timothy 3, gives that whole description of what it looks like. Guess where we're at? We're in that timing. It started in Paul's day. But what else do we know? Verse 13, or verse 11. Now is our salvation nearer than we believed. Well, what salvation would that be? That's the rapture. That's going home. That isn't justification, because that's settled in chapter 1 to 5. Sanctification is an ongoing thing. That's a future event coming. We know it's what? He can come anytime. We have to plan like he's going to tarry, but he could come before the morning's up. The imminence of it. So what do? We know something. We need to know the time. By the way, that now is high time to awake out of sleep. That's that issue over in Ephesians when he says, redeem the time. The days are evil. Time is short. You need to be, don't waste your time. Why? Because the end can come at any moment. He can reach back there in chapter 11 where he does all that cutting off and grafting in and all this stuff, and he can just flat out cut this thing done, and we're done. Time to bring them home. And then 1 Thessalonians 4, events begin to happen. So when you get in, when we talk about this, and we begin to talk about talking and witnessing to people, you need to understand where you're at time-wise, okay? Now, in the cycle, we call them generations. They weren't always called generations. They were called different names over in the study. But in the cycles of life, okay? I'm not going to write there because I want to do some other stuff there. We have our youth. They call it youth. A generation, just let me just read the definition here. We choose instead to base the length of a generational cohort group on the length of a phase of life. The phase of life is 22 years along. That's what these guys use, okay? I told you 20 to 25, basically. The youth run, I love that, 0 to 21. In Scripture, by the way, there are no teenagers. There are youths and adults. These guys got a youth going to 21. Then you have what they call a rising adulthood. That's going to be 22 to 43. Then you have what they call midlife. There's going to be 44 to 65. Then you have what they call elders, and that'll be 65 out, or 66 out to about 87. And some of the guys, they have a senior elder number, and that's that 88 and up, because science, medicines today keep people alive a lot longer than what they had anticipated. So when we begin to talk about generations, now, by the way, if you take these guys, where do they go on our circle? Well, spring is going to be the youth, isn't it? We're going to go to the rising adult in the summertime. Here's our mid-adulthood, midlife crisis. And then in the winter, we have our elders because they're beginning to die off. Okay? When we begin to look at where we were talking last time about the millennials, that's the big group right now. They're beginning to replace numerically the boomers. Okay? If you have an understanding of, and I don't know if I'm off the video or not, but I got to go that way. You have the boomer generation, the baby boomers. You have the Gen X, which are the 13ers. Then you have the millennials. And now you're into the Gen Zs, they call them, which are really the 15ers. These are the 14ers, and these are the 12ers, okay? So if somebody says, you kind of get an idea. Each sociology guys that do this, they talk differently. They're saying the same thing, okay? These guys are huge numerically. These guys are what they are. That's my generation. Late 60s up to early 80s. I'll give you some dates here in just a minute. Those guys are small. They actually call that small generation a silent generation. They don't make a lot of noise politically. They don't make a lot of noise economically. They're small. The next group are the millennial guys. They start in mid-80s and run out to early 2000s. They're a boomer generation type. They're big. They're loud economically. These are the guys that are changing how we do business and everything. I don't know if you've noticed, most of us in this room have had to fill out a mortgage application to buy a piece of property. Is that an easy event? Not at all. Do you know that the millennials, they don't own, they rent? You know why they rent and don't own? If you're going to buy real estate, buy rental property right now. You know why they rent and they don't own? They don't like the process of getting the mortgage. It isn't the mortgage, it's the process. Do you know why they don't like the process? Because they've been living on one of these bad boys, and it's a click, click, and a punch, this button, do this drop menu, and you're what? Done. Mortgage isn't that way. The banking industry, so you know what's happened? Have you guys heard of Rocket Mortgage? You know how easy it is to do? It's an app. You do everything on the computer, everything on your phone, you tap, tap, tap. They have to verify your income, and then you're done. It's that simple. Now, they have to come do the appraisals and the inspections because that's what the federal government requires. There's another one that's coming up. It's called SoFi Financial. It's .com, so everything's done on the computer. You hardly see any paper until it's time to sign the final document, and then it's an e-sign, electronic signature. What are they trying to do? They got to take this massive process and do what? Kill it down to something, because these guys are making the noise. We don't want to do it the way they did it. Follow that? These guys, they're ongoing. They haven't quite figured out themselves yet. They're still in elementary and grade school. The oldest ones are in high school right now. So these guys are starting. These guys are coming into here. Gen X's are in their midlife crisis, and the boomers are dying off. The last Navajo talker from World War II passed away. Last one. They're gone now. Only thing left is memories in a book and a plaque up on the Navajo reservation. The last guy finally, I believe he was the last one, died off. And we're going to remove statues and remove this and that, and what do we begin to do? We begin to wipe away. These guys will never learn it. The history book right now in the public school has basically 2 pages on Abraham Lincoln, a paragraph on Ronald Reagan, very little, historically speaking, about our past. Because we're bad America, and we got all these problems. Well, go look at England's history. Oh my goodness. So you got change coming, and who's driving it is this group here because they're the loudest now. They're the biggest, numerically, we're talking about. So who do we begin to talk with? These guys. These are the guys you're running into on the job, on the street, down talking, playing sports, whatever you're doing. You're going to start running into these. You run into a few of us because we think we're still young. Okay? Do you follow that? So it's good to know who you're talking to. And it's good to know what they don't know. Because when you're dealing with them, guess what? If you got to know that they don't understand some of the stuff you're going to be talking about. If any of you are friends of mine on Facebook, I put a thing up about the hymnal and the singing. You know why the hymn books are going away out of church and you're going to the overheads? It's these guys. They're pushing it. And the problem with it is when you eliminate the hymn book, because we don't like we're not talking about the Gregorian chant, but when you begin to lose 300 and 400 and 500 years of history that begin to come in, that needs to understand. I mean, you look at some of, the Wesley hymns and stuff, and you, okay, we know now better doctrinally and some of that, but man, when you just sit there and you listen to it, and it's like, man, these guys had at least some of it right, I said it the other day, I think last Sunday, I was watching Hee Haw on Facebook, and it's Hee Haw Roadside Diner. That's the page that I like. And that's where I get some of my the jokes that don't do well, I got from there, okay? But the thing is they're on TV in the early 70s, late 60s into the early mid-70s. They had a Hee Haw Gospel Quartet, and at the end of every show, they sang How Great Thou Art. They would sing Amazing Grace. They would sing Tell It to Jesus, Go Tell It on the Mount. Songs that come out of the gospel country music. But what's going out over the airwaves in 1974? How great thou art. What changed? These guys got older. They kept their mouths shut. These guys don't want it. Follow that? It takes one generation to lose the truth. It takes 4 generations to get it back. Later on, we'll talk about what we should be doing in the wintertime. What should we be doing? Standing for the truth. Keep the truth relevant. By the way, the truth is relevant no matter where you're at. It's just keeping the truth being there. So when we begin to kind of talk about this, in the cycles, okay, I'm kind of get moving here a little bit. In the cycles, this morning I'm going to give you some history, just kind of read you some stuff and talk about some things, because most of you will know this. How many of you remember JFK? You know, if you ask these guys here, the younger of the millennials and the older of the gens, they think you're talking about John Jr. and not Daddy. John died in a plane crash. They think you're talking about him and not Dad. See? So you got to, okay, they don't know that. So don't use JFK, use somebody else. In the cycles, by the way, right now, we're in, let me get let's just do this real quick here. I was going to pass all this out, and then I'm like, I'm not going to kill a tree. We are in what these guys call the 4th turning in the history of the United States. This 4th turning started in 1946 to 1964. That's the springtime. We're going to come out of winter into spring. The summertime is then going to be 1965 to 1984. The winter time, the fall time, is going to be 1984 to 2005. The winter, now they know, really started in 2005, and that's the question mark. They don't really know when it's going to end. Each tournament, each movement from here to here to here to there, a specific event happens. Okay? What happened here in 64 to 65? What was going on in our history, in our cult? We were having some cultural wars, weren't we? We were having the Vietnam War. So what does that do? That now we're moving out of spring into summer. What happened in 1980, right there, 79? We had the Palestinians take a bunch of hostages, didn't we? Who showed up on the scene politically? Ronald Reagan did. See, now we're moving into the summer. What happened in this time period? Y2K happened. We turned the millennial happened. In 2001, we had a traumatic event that moved us into the winter time. 9/11. When you move from the winter to the spring, there is a great war that's going to happen. The wars, we talked about this last time, I know. The wars that move you through, this was Korea. This was Vietnam. And the Cold War. This will be 9/11. So now we have war on terror. Follow that? War on terror. All of those wars are not decisive wars. Who won Korea? Nobody. Who won Vietnam? Nobody. Who won the Cold War? Nobody did. It's still ongoing, by the way, if you really understand what the Cold War was really all about. Who's winning the war on terror? It's a draw. They lost Mogadishu or whatever, that big city. They'll take it back. They'll get it back. There's no decisiveness. Who won World War I? The Allies did. Decisive. Signed the treaty. Boom. Who won World War II? The Allies did. Boom. Signed the treaty. Who won the Revolutionary War? America did. Signed the treaty. Who won the Civil War? The North did. Signed the treaty. See, those are all wintertime wars. Boom, we're done. Boom, boom. You see that? These over here, we'll just have a peace treaty of Paris or the peace treaty of wherever. Not decisive at all. Okay? The boomers are born here in 1940s into the 60s. They come out of World War II, the babies start popping. Boom, boom, boom. By the way, well, never mind. I'll be nice, okay? Mixed company, okay? The boomers are here. They move to here. Now who shows up? The Gen Xers are born at this time. Me, 1970. Okay? Now, don't get calmed down on the dates because everybody's dates shift. Who's born down here then? The millennials are. Who's born here? The Gen Zers are. Now, I put that up there. Where are we at in our history of our country? Springtime. Springtime is a time of growth. It's a time of newness. What happens in the springtime? Bunny rabbits come out. Everybody's having a good time. We got Easter eggs. We got every new life. What happens in the summer? It's growing, it's moving. The boomers are not going to do what their mom and dad did. They're going to do things different now. The Gen Xers, what happens in the harvest, in the fall? Things are beginning to do what? Die. It's beginning to collect up out of the field. What happens here in the winter? It's dead. It's all death. Okay? Now, the Gen Z guys are where? They're in their youth. See? They're here. So what's going to happen to these guys? By the way, the millennials are in their rising adulthood. What happens with these two guys now in the next turning of our country? Because there's going to be something, probably a World War III type event, that's going to bring us out of winter and into springtime. You with me? Who's in charge when that happens? These guys are. The millennials are. They're moving. There's a movement. The Gen Zers are going to move, or the Gen Zs are going to move here. The millennials move there. See, you got this shifting going on. Now, the elders today are sitting over here. They've shifted. The boomers have shifted all the way through into the death cycle. They're dying off. When we move into spring, 3/4 of the boomers will be dead. Because they say that this number is 2025. How old will you be in 2025, Joe? Okay, that's another 10 years, 50, about 10 years, I think. Yeah. Well, this is 17. Yes, I'm sorry. Yeah, so 8 years. See, he'll be 81-ish, 88, okay. I don't know. I don't know if I'll make it. But see, what's happening, though, is what? There's nothing he can do politically anymore, economically anymore. See, things are what? They're died down. Okay? He's had his power day. He's had his, you're in your power right there. Power politically, economically, socially, family-wise. I mean, boom, it's like, there it is. Don't have that anymore. We got a young man. How old is Seth? Just 10. Where's he at? He's born here. In 8 years, where's he going to be at? He's going to be still a youth, right? But he's going to be in the spring and summertime of the nation. We're talking about the nation. He's who we got to take care of. His age, see, how old is, okay, they're 12 and 13. Thinking about the Shoobs girl, sorry. So he'll be, what, 22-ish when we make this move in 8 years? See, there's the focal point. What we do here in the wintertime will determine what happens. What we plan in the winter determines what we happen in the spring. What does a farmer do? Harvest is over, winter is set in, snow's on the field. What's he doing? He's planning spring, isn't he? He's in the machine shop, getting his tractors fixed, getting all that work done. He's getting the seeds ordered. He's getting the fertilizer. He's getting everything to where all he's got to push is the send button, and it's done. He's got it all mapped out. Why? Because he knows what everything. I can't go work in the field. It's dead. Now I got to get ready because here I got to get going. Okay? Okay. In the cycles, there are what they call social moments. The social moment. A social moment is an era typically lasting about a decade when people perceive that historic events are radically altering their social environment. Okay? So it's a social moment. It's something that's happening in society that's going to do what? Change everything. One such moment arrived with Franklin Roosevelt's election in 1932 and stretched through VJ Day in 1945. You remember those dates? You remember about them? There's nobody here old enough. What happened in 1932? What was Franklin Roosevelt's great thing? The big deal, the great deal, the good deal. The Depression is over. We're going to start Social Security. We're going to start taxing everybody. We're going to start doing this, And what did he do? Well, what started in when was Pearl Harbor? 45? 41? So 38, I think, is when World War I or World War II started. We weren't in it at the beginning. We get dragged in it later. It's already started over there. France has already reached out. They're needing help. Roosevelt was an isolationist. We're not going to go get involved in the world's problems. That's the world's problems. We stay home. France is begging for help. England is beginning to get involved. If Japan hadn't bombed Pearl Harbor, we would have never went over there. That's their problem. We got our own. We're coming out of the Depression. That's a wintertime event, by the way. That's here. See. They bombed Pearl Harbor, and somebody said, we just woke the giant up. Hirohito did. I knew it was somebody. We just woke them up. So then what happens now? There's a call to go to war. The Industrial Revolution kicks off. The war machine kicks off. Now women are no longer moms at home. Now they're working in the factories because our men are overseas fighting a battle. Now we got the posters with the women. Boom. And what begins to happen is fundamentally America changes the family. Because now what has happened? It isn't that the rights of women or any of that. That was how it was pushed politically. It was the fact that now in the social environment, women knew what? I can do the same job that man can do. And business caught it. And we can pay her $1 instead of him $2. See? Politically, it all blew up into all the other stuff. But I'm talking about that underlining fabric. It starts right there, coming out of winter, 1930s, into the war. See? That's a social moment. Within the social moments, there are two subcategories. It's called a secular crisis. If we have secular, what's the opposite of that? A spiritual awakening. Okay? The secular crisis is when society focuses on reordering the outer world of institutions and public behavior. There's your politics. Now we're going to have women's rights marches. Now we're going to have civil rights marches. Now we're going to have this and that. That's a secular crisis. We're going to reorder how the world looks now out there. And then the spiritual awakenings. That's when society focuses on changing the inner world of values and private behavior. So this is the outside, and that's the inside. Okay? Social moments normally arrive in time intervals roughly separated by two phases of life, and they alternate in type between secular crisis and spiritual awakenings. So as one goes one way, then the next one is the spiritual awakening, secular, and they just bounce like that around the time. You with me? We doing okay? All right. In America's history, there are 18 American generations. We're going to look at all 18. No, we're not. I don't need to, I don't think. The first generation, I'll just read this to you. It began in Europe, and it runs from 1584 through 1614. What happened in 1611? The printing of a King James Bible happened. When was Gutenberg's press invented? Do you remember? It's in the late 1500s. Okay? What's going on in Europe? Change is moving. We call that the Puritan generation. What's Christopher Columbus? What's the song? 1492. Christopher Columbus sailed the ocean blue. He didn't found America. He found the southern islands down there that, he didn't land in Florida. He landed down in actually it's the Virgin Islands down in there, that territory. But what did he do? He moved, didn't he? There's a movement going on. There's a push to search out, to explore the world. When did the Pilgrims come? Do you remember? Late 1600s. That generation, they call that the Puritan generation. That generation then moves into, and I'm just going to write these up here for you, what they call the colonial cycle. That Puritan, this is part of the generation of the Puritan. Then they move into the revolutionary cycle. Then they move into the Civil War cycle. Then there's the Great Power cycle. And then the cycle we're in now is called the Millennial cycle. So you've got this generation that popped up coming out of Europe. England is our beginnings. Then they come over, and more specifically the Mayflower and the Puritans that were on the Mayflower. If you ever read the Mayflower Compact, if you haven't read it, you ought to go read it. It's full of Bible. It's unreal, the history. It's just full of Bible morality and Bible stuff. I'm not going to read you all of this. I'll give you these dates just so you have some information. The colonial, they run 1621 through 1733. The revolutionary, 1734 through 1821. Then we have the Civil War. That'll be 1822 through 1885. The Great Power, obviously 1886 through 1966. And then the millennial cycle starts in 1967, and it's on to, they don't know when, but probably 2025. One turning, two turnings, three turnings. We're coming out of that one, and we're going into that one. 5 cycles. Thus, we're coming out of the 4th, and we're going into the 5th. This is where we're at today. Follow that? Okay? Do we need a break? Let's take a break so I can reload the video and the audio file, okay? Let's do that. Take about 5 minutes. Don't go too far.